Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and with me this time I have Logan.
Good evening, Alex, everybody.
And we've got a few games to discuss. We've got the Bolton results to discuss. We've obviously got the closing of the transfer window, which I'd already covered with Brad and Dan, but happy to get your thoughts on that one as well. And then we've got the Derby game to look forward to. But we'll start with the Bolton game, which was another pretty impressive win at home, 4-0 result. Much like the Burton game, scoring 4 goals at home is always good to see. What did you make of the performance, Logan?
I love the performance on the back of the QPR loss, and obviously the loss to Wolves, and particularly all the speculation regarding the transfer window and I guess the disgruntled feeling in the camp, probably by the players and certainly the fans. It was a performance that was very needed, and it kind of did, if anything, take the sting out of the pain that was being felt at the time, and really kind of, I guess, reminded us of the quality that still does exist in the city ranks before, I guess, the late bloom in the transfer window, but really showed us the quality that we do have at our disposal. And I thought, particularly Krasicki was a different class, and yeah, positive team performance, but certainly the way that he performed was encouraging for us, to say the least.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I mean, Grzycki was great, and it sort of reminds me a bit of, we've seen Hernandez in the past sort of step up in these sorts of games and have a really great performance, as we saw against Burton, and with him now out with that Achilles, it's good to see that we've got another one in Grzycki who looks like he can really step up and, you know, put the foot to the floor against these bottom teams and really sort of orchestrate a great performance with his 2 assists and a goal. It was a really solid performance from him, but it was also a really standout performance from Bowen, who just goes from strength to strength. And I mean, if you'd said before the season started that after 5 or 6 games or however many it's been that he'd be equal top scorer in the division, it's a pretty incredible start to the campaign for him.
It certainly is an incredible start to the campaign, but I think Slatsky touched on it to say at the end of the Bolton game that he had been our best striker, or best forward rather, in the whole preseason, and leading into it, that it does in many ways doesn't seem to come as much of a shock when you consider the calibre of the teams that he was scoring against in the preseason. Often you do see players have blooming pre-seasons and then die off, but with Bowen, it seems that it's been that kind of stepping stone for him that has filled him with all the confidence that he needs. And to see the rich vein of form that he's struck at the moment with City is truly incredible, and long may it continue.
And the other incredible thing, I guess, is the fact that we are far and away the top goal scorers in the division. I think next best is Cardiff with 10 goals scored, but we've managed 12 goals, and it's a bit of an unusual feeling as a City fan. So it's a pretty exciting brand of footy that Slutsky has us playing, and I mean, long may it continue. And obviously it was great to see us get a clean sheet against Bolton, which has been probably the only missing element so far in the campaign.
Yeah, certainly. I think the confidence that will come from keeping the clean sheet against Bolton can only be a good thing. But I guess to stop you before, I think that having the goal return that you did mention under Marco Silva towards the end of last season did kind of show us, I guess, some of the attacking traits that we do have. And I guess under the Steve Bruce reign, we weren't always too familiar on the side of scoring plenty of goals, although it was, I guess, probably widely agreed that we weren't always guilty of conceding too many. So it is somewhat of a changing of the times to see the amount of goals that we are scoring, as you mentioned.
And I guess it was also good and encouraging to see that Diomande got on the goal scoring run in the game against Bolton, scoring a pretty impressive backheel flick in the opening minutes of the game, I suppose. It must be good for his confidence as well, because he's obviously been down the pecking order a little bit in terms of the strikers, and getting on the goal sheet must be pretty good for him as well. Obviously, with the arrival of Dicko, he might, I suspect, slip back down the order, and Campbell back in full fitness for the game against Derby as well. But always positive to see that there being quite a good spread of goal scorers.
Yeah, certainly. And I think Diomande himself is probably the forgotten man in many traits, I guess, throughout the preseason, as there was all this speculation as to who was going and who was staying. I think Diomande was one that, I guess, realistically, we thought we'd be able to hold on to quite easily, because the championship, with full respect to him, is probably about his level. And to see him get that goal against Bolton as well, yeah, you're right. It only can be a positive thing for us to have that pressure on our attackers to really kind of fight and cement that place in the forward line themselves without, I guess, the problem of not having any competition, which would pose a huge problem. But Diamande, certainly a man with great potential, and yeah, it will be nice to see if he can keep on the goal scoring sheet, and if so, if that does come at the expense of Dicko, well, so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, touching on Dicko, we can move on and talk about that end of the transfer window, which did see a flurry of new signings come into the squad. From your point of view, who would you say were the most exciting additions? Obviously, Irvine's probably chief amongst them. Were there any other signings as well that caught your eye?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Irvine signing, I guess, because of the Australian roots, is always going to be close to our heart, and also the fact that the credentials that he brings to the championship
from midfield's very impressive.
And certainly in a relegation threat side too. It wasn't, by no means feat that he was able to do that with Burton nonetheless. So full credit to him. And I guess, as you said, there's that nostalgic feeling of having another Socceroo in the camp. It's very exciting times for us. I still think that the Fraser Campbell and Larson signings are the ones that kind of still excite me the most. And then I guess there's plenty of youngsters to come through. I think everyone was probably a little bit upset to see the Musa link deteriorate very late on the transfer window, when at times it had looked promising. If I'm to be perfectly honest, I still feel that the club probably hasn't, or when I say the club, the Allams haven't outlaid the kind of money that I would have liked to have seen, just given the amount of outgoings we had, and also the parachute payments. I still think that whilst they have tried to offer a very astute contingency added to the camp, I still would have liked to have seen that little bit more, or that clinical signing in the form of Musa, which was talked about.
I guess the disappointing thing with Musa, though, is that Musa, it sounds like, was the one that turned down the offer in the end, that he didn't fancy dropping down to the championship, which is pretty disappointing given his track record with Slutsky in the past.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that the most confusing aspect of that was, if Musa had been linked as early on in the transfer window as we assumed that he was, how come he wasn't able to kind of find that agreement that early on that he wasn't happy to step down to the championship?
I mean, the only thing I'd say with that is as well, I mean, we've seen with Barkley at Chelsea going in and getting his medical or being close to it, and only then deciding, well, actually, no, I'm going to stick with Everton. So I completely agree. I think it's a bit disappointing if the official line is to be believed, if it was Musa who made the decision. It's a bit disappointing it was left to the last minute. But, I mean, if Leicester and Hull are both saying that, it's hard to see that either of them are making it up. But at the same time, as you say, it's a bit hard to believe that he kind of only at the last minute realised, well, hang on, actually, I don't want to play in the championship.
Yes, certainly, and I guess that's probably a bitter pill to swallow for the City fans, but it is what it is, and I do think that if we, without being too greedy, we probably do have a somewhat underrated attacking lineup now that has a very good chance of doing a job, and as you mentioned, we've already scored 12 goals and lead the division, so let's not get too carried away. With that being said as well, I also forgot to mention the addition of Kingsley, which I think is a huge signing, given the fact that it is a position that we...
Well, yeah, we've now got an official left-back.
That's right, and I think that at the start of the window, that was something that we were all crying out for, particularly the news that Robertson was leaving, to see him finally sign, and someone with the pedigree of Swansea nonetheless, it can only be a good thing. And from all reports, he seems like an extremely ambitious player, and someone that will look to really cement his spot in the City lineup, and then hopefully pushes forward toward that Premier League goal.
And then finally, just before we move on to the Derby game, I don't know if you've seen Grzycki's comments in the last day or two, and what do you make of them? Do you appreciate his honesty that he was quite keen for a move away and how close it came, or do you think it's sort of the sort of comments that might just unsettle the playing squad?
I think the difficulty is with any player that comes out and makes those kind of comments. particularly with the English football culture, as we know, they are a very traditional bunch, particularly in the north. And I don't think that there'll be many City fans that would have been found those comments too popular. But with that being said, he did also state in the same kind of interview that he was still committed to the cause, and he respects Hull as a club and respects the people in the place, and he's committed to doing his best. He just feels that he's at a high level. So, look, I think that one of the things, particularly on the final day, with reading into all of Grzycki's tweets and all of the kind of cryptic cultural differences or different translations, I think that a lot of what he gets said, or what gets said by him, seems to be translated very difficult or under very difficult circumstances, and sometimes
I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about what he's going to say, and people interpret his tweets in a particular way because they're expecting him to say something in a particular way, and I agree on that front.
And I think that if provided he is committed to the cause and does play himself into the ground until January, if the big suitors come knocking around then, and he has warranted a recall to the Premier League or a higher level, well, I think that it would probably be in his best interest to continue the form that he showed against Bolton, in order for that transfer to be, I guess, a possibility, and that can only, again, help the City cause. So I think provided he's still dedicated, I don't have too many issues with it, granted the fact that I think it will upset quite a few people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of cynics would say that his performance against Bolton was really putting himself in the shop window, and if that's the case, and if that's sort of the level that he can reach when he's really committed and really trying, it can only bode well for us, because obviously now that the window's closed, he sort of has to put his head down and really commit to the club, because I mean, he can go one of two ways. He can sulk about not getting a transfer and therefore not play very well and find himself out of the side, or because we've now got options. But if he does so, then it's even less likely that he'll get a move in January. So it's actually in his best interest to play as well as he can, and then hopefully, hope for the best that a club will come in for him from the Premier League and get that move in January. Or else, if he's playing that well, it might actually help push us towards promotion and see him back in the Premier League next season with us.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that one more thing that I'd probably like to add to that is with Slutsky, he is a manager who doesn't seem to have a fear of playing his younger players. So if Grzycki is out of form and doesn't seem to have that kind of energy level, or isn't playing to the potential that we know that he's capable of, I don't think that Slutsky will have any harm in making the substitution or resting Grzycki until he can prove himself. So I think you're right. I think it's probably a win-win for City fans once we take the emotional attachment out of it, that he almost suggests that he would be happier elsewhere.
Absolutely. Well, we've got Derby Saturday morning our time, 4:45 a.m. And for all Australian listeners, it is a televised, quote-unquote, game in the UK, which isn't actually televised here because the shambles that is the EFL televised rights in Australia, I still think haven't been decided. So there'll be various ways to be watching the game, but at least it'll be available for free, regardless of how you find it. We're playing Derby. We'll look back at some of the occasions where we've played them in the past, and I think for me and probably for you, the main one that jumps out to me as an away game at Derby was obviously the playoff game last time we were in the Championship, where we won 3-0 at their place, in probably one of our most impressive away performances in recent times, really, considering we haven't won away from home in over a year as it stands. Odebajo, Robertson, Hernandez, all on the scoring sheet that day. It was a pretty enjoyable day out for us.
It was certainly an enjoyable day out, particularly given the form that Derby were in prior to that game. It did look in a way that it was going to be a very difficult fixture, and to go out and perform in the manner that we did was extremely pleasing. And I think that the memories from that Hernandez goal will probably long sit in my memory, just because of the nature that it was scored in, and the celebration straight away from Hernandez really kind of cemented I guess, that feeling that we were there to stay, and we were a huge chance of pushing that promotion bid despite missing out on the automatic spots.
Well, it was fantastic because he was known for so long as the player that could only score tap-ins and shots from 1 yard out, and then he scores that screamer from outside the box.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that as soon as he hit it, even though it was from range, as you mentioned, you almost had that feeling that it was going straight in. And when it did, the crowd erupted. And I guess you could tell that the performance itself just, not only did it warrant the win, but you could tell that there was a feeling amongst the camp that they weren't going to make the playoff spots and just let it slip so easily, despite having some let's say, mixed form heading into the playoffs.
And then, of course, Odebajo's goal sort of deflecting off, I think, two players and then going in. I think it was officially credited as an own goal. But it was just one of those sorts of goals where you feel like when those go in, it's really your day.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess finishing off with the Robertson goal, given the fact that it was so deep into the game, and after it did find the back of the net, the celebrations that followed, there was a feeling in the camp that we had a huge confidence that we were going to be able to go back to the KCOM and be able to defend that lead pretty easily, although it didn't turn out being quite as comfortable as we'd hoped.
I was going to say, I mean, in hindsight, that Robertson goal was essentially the winner in the tie, given the fact that we lost the return leg 2-0. So that was really quite a significant goal in the end and played a huge part in getting us to that final.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Actually, another memory that I have of the City derby fixtures over the last few years was in 2012. I was fortunate enough to visit Pride Park, and it was a Robert Corrin goal and a late header from Absolute Fay, I believe, which I think it put us at top of the table.
Wow.
That night, and that was a very enjoyable moment for me, despite that Pride Park being a fantastic stadium. When they equalised, I thought we were no chance, but to the credit of the City fans, it was a very cold night, and to see us get up, that was also a game that stands out in my fond memories of following City.
Well, it does seem we do have a pretty decent record against them in recent years, and we'll talk about the game coming up this Saturday morning now. And we've sort of had a mixed start to the season, and funnily enough, you look at Derby's form and you think that they haven't had a very great start to the season themselves, but we're actually level on points, and it's only virtue of goal difference that we're sitting above them in the table. So it'll be an interesting clash going into the game. Adding to that, of course, as well, the fact that two former City players will be lining up for Derby in Davies and Huddlestone adds for a pretty interesting clash. What do you make of the game?
It certainly does, and I think if there was any kind of reminder needed that we are nestled into the championship now, and do have a very large task ahead of us if we are to, in fact, regain promotion, I think coming up against Huddlestone and Davies playing in the Derby jersey will be incredibly tough for many City fans to follow, particularly the fact that they have been pretty faithful stewards of the club over the last few years, and I guess part of the core in some pretty big moments. So I think when we see them in the Derby strip, it will all certainly hit home. But I'm pretty confident about this one. I think that will be a pretty good chance, and I do feel that, as you mentioned, Derby are on the same points as us, but maybe the fact that they're probably considering themselves to have underachieved a little bit. And I think that we've certainly underachieved, but with not having the players at our disposal that we will do come that fixture, I think that we are a pretty big chance of putting something together against them.
Well, speaking of players that we'll have at our disposal for this game, obviously saw an article during the week that Irvine has yet to train with the squad, which is obviously the case, is the fact that the transfer only went through while he was in Japan, and presumably a few other players haven't had a whole lot of training with the squad, or sort of interaction in a competitive environment with the squad. How do you see the lineup for this one? Do you see many new players coming into the starting 11, or do you think they'll sort of be eased in? I mean, obviously Clark was at left back against Bolton. Whether Kingsley does make his debut for us or his first start for us against Derby at left back, or how do you think we'll line up for this one?
I don't see there being too many changes from the Bolton game. given the fact that a lot of players have been away on international duty, and also the fact that many of them are still coming to terms with the new surroundings and the new teammates and everything that comes with, I guess, the end of a transfer window. Particularly with Jackson Irvine having travelled so far, that will be an interesting decision as to whether he plays any part in the game. I can't see Slutsky wanting to make too many changes, but I do think that if there is any changes, perhaps Kingsley for Clark would be the probably more obvious one. But again, it wouldn't surprise me too much if Slutsky was to keep faith in Max Clark and kind of reward him for his pretty impressive start to the season.
And we've had the press conference earlier today with a bit of an injury update on players like Henriksen, Campbell, and also the forgotten man Evandro, who are all fit for selection. So, to borrow a Wengerism, it looks like Evandro is basically a new signing in the fact that he's going to be fit and available for the first game in what seems like about 3 or 4 months of playing time. Because I mean, he played a couple of for the first few months after Silva signed him, and he looked quite an impressive player. But a couple of injuries at the end of last season, at the start of this season, have really sort of held him back. But he's another one who's a sort of an impressive player on his day, and could really sort of be a quality addition for the championship that we just haven't really seen much in action of. So what do you make of him in terms of his prospects for the season? Because he's another central midfield option in an area where we now have quite a lot of players.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the forgotten man analogy, given the fact that he was a Silva signing from that link with Porto, followed by the Max Exodus, if you will, pending the relegation. The fact that Evandro finds himself in a Hull jersey this year will probably become as much of a surprise for him as it does us. But as you touched on, he's a fantastic player, and from the limited time that we did see him in the Premier League, he certainly looked to have a real composure about him, and really does kind of look very confident on the ball. And I guess when you consider the likes of losing Huddlestone and much of the midfield from last season, he could somewhat be like a new signing and somewhat of a linchpin controlling the middle for us, particularly when you consider the likes of Irvine and David Myler, real workhorses around him. Might free him up to work some magic of his own.
Well, given all of that, what do you make of our prospects in the game? What do you see the score ending up being?
For some reason, I think that we usually do fare well against Derby, particularly when we're not at the Cake-On. But I, for some reason, I have a real positive feeling and can see us nicking this one 2-1.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go one step further and say I could see us holding up for a 2-0 win. I think now that we've got a clean sheet under our belts and starting to find a bit of form as a team, if we do sort of name a similar lineup to our last game against Bolton, hopefully the players starting to gel a bit better and that defence starting to look quite impressive. I mean, another one we haven't really touched on a whole lot, but who's had a really impressive start with us is Michael Hector, and I really think that he's formed quite an impressive partnership already with Dawson. And between them, I think if we can keep another clean sheet in this one, that would be a pretty fantastic result. And if we can come away with the 3 points in this game, it really sort of sets up a pretty decent bid to finish at least in the top 6.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that it'll be a positive weekend outing for us, and I think that if we are really to truly go and cement our place in the top 6 and make a fight for those playoffs, then these certainly are the bigger championship clubs that we need to be taking points off, and I think that'll happen this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know people will probably sort of think it's a bit early to be talking about pushing for the top 6 and all of that sort of thing, only about 5 or 6 games into the season. But as you say, I mean, these are the sorts of games against these sorts of clubs that we need to be winning. Obviously, with the 2 wins so far coming against Burton and Bolton, we sort of need to make a stamp of, put our name on events and really sort of beat one of those bigger clubs.
Yeah, certainly. And when you've got players like Grzycki that are claiming that the championship is a step below them, then
go out and show it. Yeah.
Yeah, you really do hope that if that's the mentality, well, let's start playing in that fashion and show these teams that many of the players in our squad are above the level that they consider to be playing.
Absolutely. Well, it's a game that we'll certainly be looking forward to for more than one reason. A lot of storylines in this one. hopefully it's a sad day out for Huddlestone and Davies, and hopefully we can get the 3 points. But until then, thank you for coming on, Logan.
Not a problem.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Until this time next week, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.